There's a common misconception that our bodies and our nervous systems react to situations. That's not something that I agree with. I think that we are predictive. Our nervous system predicts what's going to happen based on what we've encountered in the past. So let's dig into that. I believe it's a huge misconception that we react to situations. I think it comes from a place of a lack of safety. So that's why it would only apply to certain people in certain situations, and why the same reaction wouldn't come from two separate people in the same situation. Instead, I think that we predict. And there's some great work being done around this subject. I believe our predictions are based on what's happened to us in the past, the situations we've been in, our parenting, the way we are within our society, within our culture. I believe they shape our predictions about what is going to happen in certain situations. And I believe that is why we get the reactions such as triggers, and why we get those heightened reactions from certain people. And because of that, that naturally leads on to me thinking that that person who you know who is highly reactive to certain situations, I say reactive in inverted commas because, like I say, I don't think it is reactive, but that person we would see on the whole as a reactive person, I believe that's a person whose nervous system has learned that they need to be careful in a situation that is replicating something that has happened to them in the past, which took away their safety. See, our nervous systems constantly want to be able to feel safe. It's why anything new to us, anything that is outside of our comfort zone, is immediately interpreted as bad. That's why we'll get anxiety around new things, because the body is unsure. There are variables which we can't control because we don't know about them. So it's why, for example, when we try anything new for the first time, it's going to feel unsafe. But after repetition, that unsafety comes down and down because we've got more control, more information to be able to make predictions rather than just react to the situation. So with our experiences in the past and our upbringing dictating our predictions going forward, there is an extreme example of this which would make sense if predictions were to be the case. Now, we all hear about domestic violence in relationships, hopefully not in our own, but if we do hear about a friend, or we hear about somebody that somebody knows, or read about domestic violence in relationships, we often think, if that's not normal to us, that's pretty inconceivable as to how you could get to that point. And what usually becomes even more inconceivable to us is that a person would choose to return to that relationship. Because if that's not our normal, it's hard for us to comprehend why someone would go back. But I think the prediction system explains this very well. Say, for example, you've got a woman who grows up in a household where domestic violence was prominent. Say, for example, not that it's always the case, but the father in that person's childhood was abusive to the mother, and there was domestic abuse. Then to that child, to the woman, the grown adult, as a child, their nervous system gets used to that heightened state as normal. It is what's modeled for them. It's what they feel or felt throughout their childhood. So when it comes to adult relationships, as that person grows, their nervous system and their choices will be dictated by what their nervous system feels as normal. So they aren't likely, or they are less likely, if they haven't done work to heal that kind of wound, to chase relationships and partners who will perpetuate that cycle for them, who will give them the nervous system response that's really high, that kind of chaos that comes with the domestic violence, so that they can feel normal. It just happens that their normal is not your normal. And then if they cannot find that normal, that nervous system feeling, that heightened state of excitation that they were used to as children, then they're in any other relationship, then they're always going to return to domestic violence relationships. And even if they look for new partners, it's very likely, if they haven't done work to heal that wound, that they will pick partners who will again perpetuate the domestic violence cycle. So it comes from a nervous system perspective. It doesn't matter what's perceived as good or bad. In the nervous system, it's what's normal and what's new. New to the nervous system is not safe. Known is safe. It may be that it's very stressful and that there's a lot of danger in that situation, but to the nervous system, well, at least I know what that danger is, so I'm more likely to go back there. Whether that makes any conscious sense as an observer of that situation or not doesn't really matter. It matters that the nervous system wants to feel safe. And if we want to change that prediction, that is a lot of work. So when it comes to people wanting to change big things like getting out of domestic violence relationships, it's not as simple as let's just end this relationship and go to a different one, a different, better one. Because it's likely that if they were to find a relationship that was stable and the other person didn't give them that nervous system response, they would see it as boring because it doesn't give them the excitation that they need to feel normal. And there's also something else for us to sort of explore there in terms of our response. Say, for example, that we're not talking now about domestic violence, but we've had something happen to us on the negative side which caused a huge nervous system response. So say, for example, we've got something like jealousy in a partner. We may see it that the jealousy is unfounded because we're not doing anything different to how we would in terms of interacting with others and going about our lives, but a new partner might interpret what we do as a threat to them and exhibit some jealous style behaviours. And you would be right in thinking that their reaction to that situation has very little to do with your actions and what your intentions are, because their response to what's going on in the situation is not based in the here and now, it's based on what's happened to them. It's very possible that if we're seeing behaviours like jealousy, that they aren't founded in the here and now. Instead, we're getting a nervous system reaction based on a prediction to what's happened in the past to somebody. So you can almost guarantee that somebody who experiences jealousy has at some point in the past experienced abandonment. So what it means, what your actions in that present moment are meaning to your spouse, to that person who you're seeing the jealous behaviours from, is that whatever it is that you're doing has been done in the past, or something similar has been done in the past, and it led to this outcome. An outcome which caused them to lose their safety and to feel unsafe and like everything was not okay. So something in what you're doing is triggering that response in them. And that is absolutely for them to heal, but we can be aware of those things. But the point here is that they aren't treating that situation as an isolated incident, and we never ever are. All of us have our predictions around what is going to happen in the world around us based on what's happened in the past. And again, it comes back to, yes, we can change them. There's just one more thing that I want to cover before I do cover how we can start to address the predictions. And that is that when we experience something, a memory that causes us to have triggers in the future, they are stored in the body. Now, if we repress them, they will go into our body, but they go in as whole experiences. It's all of the senses involved. It's smell, so it can be a certain smell that can trigger people. It can be sounds. It can be how we feel in our nervous system. Any of those triggers can then set us off to have the nervous system response that we had at the original time of the experience happening to us. But what the key point is in that is that these will stay repressed until we're able to process them. The body will store that tension and have an energy blockage until we learn what it is we needed to learn from that memory. And it's often not possible in the time that we experience things like that. Let's just call them what they are, they're traumas. When we experience traumas, we aren't in a place where our nervous system is capable of dealing with the situation, and there's often an element of a lack of control in the situation. So if we've got a nervous system which isn't equipped to deal with the situation and a lack of control in a situation, we've got a high possibility of trauma occurring. Now, the body will hold on to those memories, I believe, until we learn from them, until we're able to bring them to the surface in a safe, connected manner and be able to process them, to be able to make sense of what we needed to learn from that situation. So if we've got, say, for example, something like behavioral pattern of repression as an adult, it's very likely that at some point throughout our lives, we learn from either parents or society or culture that when we express ourselves authentically, it will be met with negativity, it will be shut down, it will not be encouraged. And what that teaches us as adults is that what I need and what I feel is not as important as what I need to do in the outside world and who I need to listen to. And we see then a divide between who you are and what you need to do and what you need to do from the outside world. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again, and I'll probably say it another 5,000 times to people, and probably on these podcasts, is that the gap between who you are and your inside world and who the outside world demands you to be wants to be as small as possible. So the bigger that gap gets, the more we get resentment, the more we get anger, and the more we get mental health difficulties, because we are denying who we are to fit into somebody else's box. I will never ever tell anybody to do that if it's not necessary for survival. And that's where it comes down to. We learn these patterns at a young age when we're not able to process and look after ourselves and to protect ourselves. We cannot be that person for ourselves when we're in childhood, when we're growing and when we're learning these things. But we can be that person for ourselves as adults. And the real hard work is getting from a focus on the outside world to getting back to you, to who you are and what you need. Now that I've said that and I've covered what is probably the main point of all of the work that I do, I think it's good to outline some of the ways in which we can change our predictions. So we've built these predictions based on what's happened in our lives, and we want to change them. What if we know that one of them isn't particularly useful to us? Because you can almost guarantee that that person in the domestic violence relationship knows that returning to that relationship is probably not the best move for them consciously, but they cannot help going back. That jealous person probably knows jealousy isn't serving them to be who they want to be with their partner. And that person who hides everything, how they feel inside, and isn't able to express themselves in the outside world will feel resentment towards the outside world and what they're having to do in the outside world. So all of those people are likely to be able to see that they consciously want to make change. So how do we change the predictions that we're making? There's a guy called Carl Friston who's absolutely unbelievable, and he's come up with the free energy principle, which is a way to change predictions. Now, I don't know what his motivator for coming up with the theory is, but it very much applies to what we're talking about here. There are three options when it comes to changing the prediction. We can working on predictions. The first one is we can change the prediction. The second one is we can change how we feel about the prediction. And the third one is we can change the world to fit the prediction. So it's key to outline here that any prediction error, so any prediction which is causing us discomfort instead of protecting us, if it no longer serves us, then it will cause something called a somatic error, where our nervous system feels the disparity between how it has interpreted the world and made a prediction and the feedback that comes from the outside world. So there is the inside world, what's happening on the inside, and then there is the outside world and what's happening there. And the bigger the disparity between what the prediction was and what was actually needed, the bigger the prediction error or the somatic error. When it comes to changing the prediction, which was option one of the three, what we're looking to do is marry what the prediction is from the inside world and what the outside world is demanding. Now, that is a very long process to do, because we have to know where the trigger or the prediction is taking us in the moment. We have to feel when we are triggered and realize what situations in our lives trigger us. From there, we can then start to work it back to build awareness of where did that prediction come from? What was the first time, or when were the repeated times, if it wasn't a one-off, that prediction was drilled in and built through conditioning? And then we need to create situations from there which show us that the opposite of that prediction is true. We need to provide safety to our nervous system. We need to provide wins so that our nervous system thinks, you know what, I can probably accept that original prediction might have been a little off and we can go this way. There is a specific way that we can do this in training. Say, for example, we've got a highly anxious person, and whenever a stressful situation arises, their nervous system will want to give a 10 out of 10. But we don't want to be living life in a series of 10 out of 10, because if your nervous system goes up, that means your stress response goes up. And if we live in a perpetual state of stress response, it's called a chronic stress response, that's when we start to get age-related disease come a lot quicker. And then we start to get metabolic diseases come a lot quicker, because we're not supposed to be firefighting all the time. And that's what a highly charged and dysregulated nervous system will give us. It will give us the stress response far more often than it's needed. So if the outside world is demanding a 7 and we're giving it a 10 over and over and over again, then we're going to crash ourselves eventually into a period of depression, because every time we give a 7 in the outside world a 10, we cause a somatic error, and our nervous system eventually will say, you need to stop doing this. Here's a period of depression. Go think about what you've done. If in that sense, the depression then becomes a period on the naughty step. So if we're going to train that, a specific way we can do that is 10 minutes on any cardio piece that you can find. And when you get into the 10 minutes, what you're looking to find is the fastest pace that you can stay nose to mouth, breathing nice and calm. Can you find a pace where that trigger for I need to go, I want to sprint, I want to give 10 out of 10 arises, and then Say for example, we were on like an airdyne or something like that. If at 61 RPM a minute, revs per minute, your brain starts to go, it's time to sprint, let's go, we're in a stressful situation, then we want to go at 60, 59 and hold that for the entire 10 minutes and stay in that stress. What that does is teach our nervous system that we can stay in stress safely, that intensity is okay. We don't need to cut and run. We don't need to give that 10 out of 10. We can just give a 7 out of 10. We can give the outside world what it's asking for. The reason that's so powerful is because the body treats all stresses the same, whether it's a cognitive, a social, or a physical stress. Our response to the stress will be exactly the same. So when we teach this in the gym, when we're on that cardio piece for 10 minutes, then what we're doing is telling the body it's okay to stay in stress. So when we take that out to the hard conversations with our spouses, to that hard email you need to send, or the difficult conversation with a boss, it makes it that much easier to approach that with a 7 and not think this is a 10 out of 10 situation. And thus, we're changing that prediction that was, I need a 10 to deal with stressful situations. You don't. We need a 7, and we need to stay in that 7 and be okay. And that's exactly what that style of training is going to teach us. Now, when it comes to training, that is the main option that I would love us to pursue, but it's very difficult to go after. The second option we have is to change how we feel about a prediction. Now, this is often used in a negative way by people, by what Julian Pineau has come up with as a sympathetic fix. And I think this one affects probably 95+% of the population. When we get into a stressful situation, if we want to change how we feel about the prediction, what we're going to do is create a state within our body that takes us from that charged situation to feeling calm. So when we feel like we are triggered, like we've got a high nervous system response to a situation, we're going to want to calm that down. And the body is craving in that situation a sympathetic response. And the easiest way all of us can give ourselves a sympathetic response without actually doing anything is carbohydrates or stimulants. So it's alcohol, it's coffee, and it's sugar. So think about the last time that you were stressed. What did you want to reach for? What was the thing that you wanted to go for? And that is your sympathetic fix. For some people it's chocolate, some it's alcohol, some it's caffeine. But what it allows us to do is to take our attention towards the outside world. But what that does in the process is takes our attention away from our inside world and what was causing the trigger in the first place. So it puts a sheet over what we need to deal with because we cannot see it anymore. So if that nervous system response is too much for us to deal with and we need to mask it, that means we just took another step further away from what we needed to address, not towards it. You can see how that would be a very negative thing with what I've explained before about the somatic errors, because we're triggered for a reason. There's something that we need to deal with, and the trigger will tell us where we need to look. But if we continuously look away and mask that feeling of needing to go and look at something and deal with something, we're creating a bigger somatic error. That is getting bigger, not smaller. So every time we reach for that alcohol, the chocolate, the caffeine in stressful situations, we are making our mental health worse. It is a choice then to actively make our mental health worse. But it's not a conscious choice until it is conscious. So now that you know that, you can pay attention to what you reach for when you are stressed. Do you want to repress things? Do you want to choke them down? Do you want to take negative energy towards yourself? Do you want to completely ignore? Do you want to get absolutely wasted and not think about it? These things are all clues as to where we need to look if we can pay attention to when they show up. The last option we have is another option that I absolutely love. If we want to change a prediction, we can change the world to fit our prediction. Now that means if you see yourself as someone who can deal with stress, who can process stressful situations and is okay in them, then when a stressful situation comes up, if that doesn't match and you actually want to reach for fixes, it means we've got a disparity. It means that there's a gap between how you see yourself and when it hits the fan, so to speak, that you cannot actually deal with that situation. And that's something we call distress tolerance. So when it comes to dealing with stressful situations, we can absolutely train that muscle of being able to stay in it and to go after things which are very, very difficult and deal with things in a calm way that are very stressful. And there's a big difference between being able to stay in stress because that's what your nervous system's used to and you just endure it. But if you're not present and you're not able to make calm decisions, your actual ability to deal with stress is likely not very high. But that we can work on. We can find out and test what your capacity for tolerating stress is. The easiest way that we can test that in the gym is whether you can give me 100% and choose to embrace the hardest stress that you can put yourself in. Can you choose to go there, or are you likely to endure? And there are a number of ways we could do that too, but they'd be a bit more difficult for me to explain over video, much easier to show you in person. But what we would be trying to do is build your exposure to stress, and then once we've been in stress, can we make the nervous system calm down to a place where it knows, oh, we went this far, that's further than I've ever been before into distress, and then can we create safety? Can we calm the nervous system down to feel like, I tell you what, I predicted that was going to be worse than it was, and I didn't die, and I'm still safe and I'm still okay. And then we go again, and we bring you back to safety. So that what we're doing over time is increasing our exposure to stress and creating safety in bigger and bigger boundaries. And like I said before, the nervous system will treat all stresses the same. So when it comes to increasing your capacity to engage with stress and to choose stress and stay present within it, then that transpires out into other areas of our lives. Like I said before, that difficult conversation with the spouse, that thing that you really need to do, just gets a little bit easier. So just to summarize, all of those options are about minimizing those somatic errors. We're about mirroring how we feel inside and what the outside world is demanding of us. We want those to be in harmony. It's all about bringing you more peace, bringing you closer to who you are and what your inner world requires, and then giving yourself more of what you need.